Welcome back to another episode of the Sky Society podcast. We are doing a special edition of the podcast today where we are doing a live audience and we'll have a live Q&A at the end of this episode. Today, I'll be chatting with Marissa Marano. She is the Director of Brand Marketing at solidcore. She has quite a lengthy experience working in the kind of fitness, health, and wellness space. So she was at Reebok for almost 9 years before moving over to solidcore. So very excited to talk to her, hear all her insights on marketing, branding, and especially within the fitness industry. So welcome, Marissa.
Thank you, Natalie. I'm so excited. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for coming on. Very excited to jump into your career journey and how you came to be the director of brand marketing, which is such an incredible accomplishment over at solidcore. So typically with episodes, I always love to go back and rewind to where you started because oftentimes you don't know where you're going to end up, or it wasn't always the perfect path to, the dream job that you end up with now. So can you take me back a little bit from you graduated with a communications degree in business? Can you talk to me kind of at that point? Did you know you wanted to go into marketing, or what was your initial start into your marketing career?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. You're making me have to think real back. So I went to University of New Hampshire, as you mentioned, and studied communications and business. When I was there, I had kind of the inkling that I wanted to go into marketing and that I really enjoyed that side and that profession, but I didn't know. I mean, we all can probably relate. Marketing is there's so much variety and so many different avenues you can go into. So when I was there, I didn't really know what area of marketing I wanted to go into. And this is probably such a not business way answer, but I remember during that time, it was, in the social sphere, it was all about Laguna Beach and Kristen Cavallari and like Lauren Conrad. And during that time, I was like, oh, they went into PR. That looks really interesting. That's something I feel like I could be really good at. So I actually ended up looking for an internship during my junior year at UNH at Michael Kors. And I went into a PR internship there over the summer in Manhattan, and I absolutely hated it. I knew right away. I was like, this is not for me. It was more and it wasn't the company, because I had nothing but great things to say. I had a wonderful boss during the time I was there, but really I understood at the end of the day, like there wasn't probably going to be as much compensation probably in the fashion PR space than I was hoping for in my long-term career. And then secondly, it was just really cutthroat. And as just like a female, I know my ways of working and communicating, I just wasn't necessarily vibing with the area and the type of people that were at that kind of a company. While I loved the experience, it was actually a really eye-opening opportunity for me to realize like PR is not it, but what else is there? So there was still, I look at it as like a great experience, but I knew it then led me into kind of looking at just overall marketing. So I graduated from UNH and I came across this role at Reebok, which was an apprenticeship. So different from an internship where there wasn't necessarily compensation, but it was a paid opportunity where I got to kind of round robin and see all different avenues and facets of marketing within Reebok. So I worked in the trade marketing sector of Reebok, which was basically working with different accounts. So think like Urban Outfitters, Dick's Sporting Goods, accounts that we sold to from a Reebok standpoint. And I would work with a sales counterpart. I would go in quarterly to meet with each of these accounts. Going down to Urban Outfitters, I remember I was like, wow, this is so cool. And it was Free People, Urban Outfitters, and Anthropologie. And I was like, these are all my favorite stores. What a like dream job. And I had to present with the salesperson to kind of say, like, here is the way we want to market with you and we want to partner. So it was a little bit of sales and marketing together. And I really, really enjoyed it. So after the year and kind of seeing different marketing opportunities within Reebok, I actually stuck with the trade marketing role for about 3 or 4 years, which was just focused on our US business, and was able to just like kind of like refine the skills of marketing, but then also be at a company where I could see a global side that had marketing and then a national side that had marketing and all the different avenues. So just getting my foot in while, it was a year program. Luckily, at the end of the year, I did get hired for a full-time job, but it was a program that I thought was just a perfect step coming out of college, because at that point, I just didn't know where I wanted to get or put my foot in the water for the marketing opportunity for, the rest of your career. And the good thing is, these opportunities, it was like something I could see all the different options and then kind of pick and choose and really put myself towards that.
That is amazing. Okay, I want to dive into some of the things that you kind of touched on. So first, tell me about, so you went into PR and you realized not anything like bad about Michael Kors, but just like that environment wasn't for you. Can you describe the difference between the environment in the PR space versus after going into marketing, how that was different?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when looking at Michael Kors, I just knew at that point, like fashion was something I was really interested in. But when I went into the actual industry, it wasn't something I could see myself in long term, just because my personality wasn't fitting with kind of the cutthroat, stressful environment that was had at that moment. It was also a year where it was not the best business year for Michael Kors. So I would say like I came in at probably a tumultuous time, which didn't really give me any favors. But going into Reebok, it was a fitness athleisure company. They were still trying to figure out and kind of, what their path was. Are we going to be more lifestyle and working for like our classic footwear and apparel? Or are we going to be more performance driven and be, one signing all the athletes that are in the NHL and NBA and NFL and go down that route? So it was really fun to be at Reebok because, and quite honestly, I made some of the best friends that I've ever had because I knew immediately these are like-minded people. I had almost like a class of, there was 9 of us, I believe, that all entered at the same time, right out of college, trying to figure out what we wanted to do. So that instant bond at such a, vulnerable time in your life, it really made us like connected for life. And 3 of them will be at my wedding in 2 months. My
Oh my
boss from that
gosh.
time still will be there. It was kind of that like serendipitous opportunity that I do feel so truly lucky still to this day to have had, because as soon as I stepped foot into the company, I knew immediately we were all on the same page. I mean, we all loved fitness. That's why we were at Reebok. And I feel like someone once said to me, being in fitness and when you work out with one another, I mean, think when you go to a Barry's or a solidcore, you're working next to people that are pushing themselves and really like getting into, a place where you're all working towards a common goal, right? You're wanting to improve your health, improve, how you feel mentally and physically. So to kind of be at a company where that was embedded, I mean, you could work out in the middle of the day. It was encouraged. You should go to do a run with your boss at lunchtime. And that was totally acceptable. So for me, it was just like a great like synergy of the things that I cared about and had passion for. And then I was able to market because it just came so seamlessly because I really enjoyed the product at the end of the day.
That is really inspiring, I think, to hear. You make a good point about having that strong bond with your coworkers makes all of the difference with how you perceive your job and if you like your job. I think it's such an underrated factor of just like you don't maybe like think of that as like a reason why you would join a company, but company culture plays a huge role into that. And also just like going to work is so much more fun when you like the people that you're with. And maybe there you felt less like you were competing,
Right.
maybe back in PR where it felt more competitive versus going over to Reebok felt a little bit more like you were working together on a team for a common goal. Uh,
Yeah.
I also love how you said go on a run with your boss for lunch. I feel like some of us maybe like that sounds like hell. And other
Yeah.
people are probably like, that is a dream. I would love that. Like there's 2 sides to the spectrum of that. But that
Absolutely.
is really cool when that's part of like ingrained in the culture. And you're absolutely right. I know with even my friends and I, when we go to workout classes together, it's always just a fun experience.
Yeah.
I don't know, have you heard of Sweat Pals?
I have not. Is that kind of like a social group that all go and work out together?
Yeah. So workout
That.
classes will sometimes it's like it's connecting. So like there's like a workout place near me and they'll hold like a group class. Well, they'll invite like the community or they'll do a class at like a park but it's like anybody can join you like do workout classes with your
I
friends.
love
I
that.
don't know
It's
if
the
they
best
have
way
it.
to make friends too,
Yeah.
especially in like new areas growing. I moved to Nashville. I remember at one point and I didn't know how to meet anyone. And it was fitness that like I ended up making some of the friends that I had in the area.
Yeah. I think it's great. And I think that I would definitely want to dive a little bit deeper about what working in the fitness space and in that industry. Obviously, you really liked it because you stayed at Reebok for almost 9 years and then now you're at solidcore. So obviously you found a home there, but you kind of touched on, having that aspect at work of where fitness is encouraged. But what else about working at Reebok and now at solidcore in this space do you really love?
Yeah. So when I, started at Reebok, it was more on our US business. And I'm sure many of you can and know this. Reebok was not one of the more well-known names. I mean, if you probably ask your parents or your grandparents, Reebok was it back in the day. And we had every name under the sun. I mean, I have pictures on my phone of me and Shaquille O'Neal, and you can imagine the height difference. It's just like so funny. But with it, it was still a company that you were on this like upward trajectory. Everyone had this fight to want to make Reebok win and be a household name. The problem was we were owned by Adidas at the time, and a lot of people didn't know that.
I
So
did not know
as you
that.
yeah, and it
Yeah.
made no sense to be honest, because at the end of the day, we were competitors. So we were
Yeah.
constantly fighting and bidding for different celebrity opportunities or different accounts. And
Mhm.
they would always pick Adidas because they had all the funding. So if we ever wanted to do something, they weren't going to let us do it because they wanted to take that great idea. So it was a hard place to be, but I think it really made everyone at the company that much closer because we were all kind of in this like good fight. Like we wanted to make it, we all wanted to win. We all wanted to see ourselves succeed together. And we had this kind of team camaraderie that I don't think, you know, not every company has more or less. And knowing that it was also our global headquarters, we had both our national team, but then we had a market where it was a completely different story. So halfway through my career at Reebok, I moved over to the global side after a reorg. They put me on our training apparel product group, and I was able to service all different markets across the world. And it was one of the most eye-opening experiences because within the US, it was this like dogfight, right? Like every account we went into, I was basically having to be the role of a cheerleader of like, this is why we're so great. Please buy into us. So it had this salesy touch to it. But then moving over into my global role at Reebok, it then became so apparent like every market is so different and how you market to every individual market looks completely different. And we were winning in Europe. So Europe, I mean, Reebok was hotter than hot when I was working there. But then you talk to a US colleague and it's like we couldn't even get our foot in the door at Dick's Sporting Goods. And these conversations, while the same brand, just look totally different to different consumers depending on where you were in the country. So it was really fun because as a part of the role, I was able to travel to a lot of really amazing places and, do a lot of consumer insights and client work where I realized just how different it was that you had to market based on where you were and what product was coming out. Even, launching a new lifestyle sneaker, who we had as like the brand face and name looked different in the US than it did in Norway or than it did in Paris because everywhere that you were, there was someone else that was going to be more aspirational to them than like a Gigi Hadid, who is someone that we partnered with in the US, but she wasn't going to resonate in Europe because they didn't see her as like aspirational, which was so interesting. So it was really incredible, I think, at the time to just have that kind of like wider scope of marketing in the US is just so different than how you would approach it in other areas within the globe, and a lot of nuances that I never understood or knew of. But it was a really awesome growing opportunity for me that kind of fell into my lap that I was super scared about, but then ended up being something that really unlocked my marketing career, I think, for the better long term.
That is super, super interesting to hear. And And one thing that comes to mind is just, especially with shoes. So I have Reeboks. I love Reeboks.
Good.
But I also notice I really love fashion, and it's really interesting to see how quickly shoes change. Like what shoe is in style, right? Like I know, I remember, back in middle school or high school, it was like everybody wore Vans this year, and the next year, if you didn't have Converse, like you were, and you were out.
Not
Like you
cool.
had to have Converse.
Yeah.
And then it was like the Nike, like Air Force Ones had their moment, and like now we're in the Sambas. I'm curious if is that purely like chance, or is that like those companies really subconsciously influencing us in ways that we don't even know that makes the next brand like the it shoe of the season?
I would say it's a combination, right? So we were always working like 2 seasons out at a time. So while we're in uh, winter of 2024, the team at Reebok is probably at this point looking at SS25, which is just crazy. And there's companies out there that will help kind of give you insight into what the trends are coming up next. And with that, we had our arsenal of like historical product, right? Like our classics. They've been around since the 80s. Our Club C's, they were well-known shoes. But in the marketplace, it was all about how do you make it so undersaturated, right? So you take out all of the shoe that you want to later market it, longer term, so that you didn't have access to it, you wouldn't see it. And then when we relaunched it, it was like making it into such a big deal and then doing it in small quantities. So you were able to have that drive to purchase because you knew it was such limited quantities. It's what's
Yes.
happening with Sambas now. I mean, depending
Yes.
on what day you go on, you might not find your size. And that drives so much consumer need and want. And that I think was really interesting and fun to work on because I was able to work on Cardi B's first launch with Reebok. And as you can imagine, when you mix in an asset or a face to kind of your marketing campaign, there's a lot of different nuances that come into that. And I've been lucky to work with some really amazing people that are super famous and some that were, definitely a little bit more difficult that you had to manage appropriately because at the end of the day, you needed them to sell the shoe that you wanted. And nowadays, every celebrity has their own shoe. It's like it's so oversaturated of a market. But it's really interesting because especially in the States where everyone has their own shoe, everyone has their own apparel line, right? I mean, you can think of any celebrity, Khloe Kardashian, Kate Hudson, they all have their own lines. It's so there's nothing unique anymore or special about it, which is hard. But in Europe or in Asia Pacific, it's a different kind of model. It's not necessarily every person that's famous gets their own shoe and that's what drives it. But here in the States, it's definitely in that kind of world right now, which for better or for worse, it's driving consumers to buy because it's someone that they either find aspirational or they just really like the style of it. And with Cardi B, that was definitely an interesting project that I was able to work on and really see what drove that consumer demand was just like people loved her. And it was during her prime of just coming out with all of her top hits. And yeah, it was a unique shoe that really drove so much business for Reebok and put us back on the map.
That is super interesting to hear. And the partnership side, I always love when there's that aspect. It's so fun. And I think it's really cool now just to see how I feel like more brands are doing creative partnerships that I think are a fun way to bring more attention to a brand. But I know with celebrities you mentioned, like it could be very difficult and stressful working with a celebrity because it's less of like, two brands collaborating on like features. It's more of like we're going to use your fame to like help, promote the shoe. And I'm sure that can have, like you said, a lot of nuances to like doing that. So when doing a campaign with someone like Cardi B, you mentioned that one was really special. What was your like favorite part about doing that? And then also what was the hardest part?
Yeah, I would actually say while I loved working on Cardi B because I was actually able to work with one of my very best friends on it and we were kind of this duo like ready to crush it. My favorite project in working at Reebok was actually on our sports bra that came out. It was called the Pure Move Sports Bra, and it had this tech in it that basically adapted to your body movement and provided you more support during the times of
Mhm.
like running and high impact, um, you know, exercising that you were doing. And that was all derived from a female at Reebok who was in our product development group, that she just saw a gap and a need for women that needed the support and couldn't find in the size or the way that they needed to be fit for, exercising and doing fitness that would help them better their lives. And with me, in my marketing experience, when there is something that is like a unique consumer need that we're able to meet with a product and then be able to market it, we were able to utilize pieces like Denai Guerrera, who was in, oh gosh, what movie was it at that time? I'm totally going to blank. Natalie Manuel, who was in Game of Thrones, Gigi Hadid, Nina Dobrev. We had this like slew of
Oh my
just
gosh.
female empowering rock stars that were able to shoot all synonymously in the sports bra, talk about their experience in fitness space and, finding the right sports bra that fit them, but also talk to bodies that weren't necessarily having sports bras that were made for them. And for me, that passion around the product and actually being able to help people, I think is what really led me to understand like what I love about marketing so much. And one of the reasons why I went to solidcore was I didn't want it to always be about just like marketing the next sneaker or the next apparel piece. I wanted to actually do something that I felt like I was helping improve people's lives, or there was like greater impact for the work that I was doing. And that project led me to really unlock that and then want to seek it out more in a different kind of industry, not industry, but career path for me.
Yeah, that is really interesting to hear. I know sports bras specifically. I mean, I know obviously this audience is mostly women. A lot of you can probably relate to like the struggle of finding a sports bra that fits. I know I have friends that just, go on and on about how hard it is to find like a brand that works for them. And so I can imagine, especially being like a woman and creating a product for women that solves a need unique to women, that is awesome. And I can imagine very motivating to work on. And you mentioned your switch over to solidcore, so I kind of want to move in that direction a little bit. But you were
Yeah.
here at Reebok for a very, very long time. That is really rare to see. I think, especially now, most of us are switching jobs every 2 to 3 years. There's a
Mhm.
lot of, people out there that will say it's better to switch jobs every 2 to 3 years because then you're going to get a higher raise, you're going to get paid more. So can you, one, like tell me about your decision to stay so long at Reebok, and then why you just like when you decided that your time there was done and then you made the switch over to solidcore.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, coming out of college, like I mentioned, it's such a vulnerable state for where you are in your life, right? You're coming out maybe with a significant other, maybe not, maybe searching for what that gap is in your life, going into maybe a new place and a new city to kind of start your roots. And whether that's with friends or not with friends and having to make friends, there's just so many things happening. And I think starting at Reebok and creating that kind of group of people, like-minded individuals that I could relate to, that I worked with, that I grew to have some of my best friends, that provided such a comfort zone for me. And I think after probably 6 or 7 years, I started to feel like I was getting stagnant, like there wasn't necessarily room to grow, but I still was learning. I was still able to have work on projects that were still career defining, but also learn from really awesome females in the space. I was lucky to have some really great bosses that were all female. I mean, up until this year, I've only had female bosses, which is very unique as well in a career trajectory. But, I think after 7 or so years, I was like, okay, like, I don't know where I'm going to go from here. I don't know if I necessarily want to be CMO at a Reebok for what it could be. And I saw where the business was going. Eventually, Adidas decided to sell us in year 9. And I think that's what catapulted me to like pause, take a beat, look at what I've done so far and where I wasn't seeing kind of growth was because I wasn't learning. I was just comfortable. And I think until that kind of scariness of like what's going to happen when we get sold, that it was more scary to hold out and see what that was going to look like versus looking for a new opportunity. And I think it really forced my hand to like put myself in a really uncomfortable situation and wanting to say, you know what, I'm going to leave and I'm going to look for something else, even though I love this job so much and I love the people so much. And that's what really kept me there for so long. I need for my future growth and my future family that I want to build out to have a career that is going to challenge me. And then I'm going to continue to stay excited and invigorated by what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis. I mean, it's a majority of your life, right? Your everyday week. So when we got sold, it was to a company that, you know, I still wanted to hear them out, wanted to see what their vision was. And I wasn't necessarily aligned and just had this gut feeling like, you know what, you got to move on. And it was really scary because I was living in Nashville at the time and I knew we weren't going to be there for long term. So I was like, where am I going to go? What am I going to get for my next job if we're not going to stay here? I can't just, you know, hop to somewhere for 6 months and leave again. That's way more scary. So I actually ended up finding an opportunity with Athleta. And I did a 6-month contract with them, working remotely. They were on the West Coast. I was on the East Coast. So that made for some pretty long night meetings, but I, again, was blessed with a really amazing boss and team that I continue to learn and seek. But I realized that probably the apparel and footwear industry, I've gotten everything I wanted to get out of it at this point. And then I had interviewed with a prior boss of mine at Hilton, who then moved over to solidcore. And I had just been searching on LinkedIn while I was at Athleta, knowing my contract was coming to an end. And I saw that she was hiring for a director of brand marketing. And I was like, oh gosh, I'm a senior manager of, 4 years. I don't know if I'm qualified, but I really felt like I connected with her when I interviewed with her at Hilton. Let me reach out. So I just cold LinkedIn messaged her and I was like, Lisa, I really loved our interview experience together. And while it didn't work out, I don't know much about solid core, but I know I love fitness and I know I'm ready for the next step in my career. Would you be open to interviewing me for this role? And 2 weeks later, I was in DC interviewing and I got it. And with solid core, I knew that's a whole other boat because it was a completely different marketing experience. But it was something I knew I had to do. And now looking back, I'm really proud of myself. But at the time I was completely scared, and didn't know what to do. And you could ask any one of my best friends. There were many calls late at night of like, did I make a mistake? Like, I'm terrified of what I'm doing. I have imposter syndrome through and through. And it took me about 6 or 8 months to really feel like I had my feet underneath me. And now I'm just so glad that I did because it's been a really awesome opportunity.
That is a very brave and bold move to make and a huge risk, but obviously it paid off. And I'm curious, so going into a new role that's an entirely new market that I mean, they're both like, Reebok shoes, fitness,
Fitness.
but like solid core is a classic. It's very different. So you mentioned you had a lot of imposter syndrome. So when you are switching to a new type of industry where the audience you're marketing is entirely different, how do you go about understanding this new market? Like you said it took you 6 to 8 months to feel like you had your feet on the ground. So what were you doing during that time to really learn this new role and learn this new space?
Yeah, I think it was honestly infiltrating into kind of what solid core was. So I went to as many classes, I talked to as many clients, coaches, people in the community just to understand like, what are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? Why do you love solid core so much? Because I live in Providence now and there isn't a solid core here. So I had no real understanding and they moved to Boston after I had left. So I didn't really know much about them and coming on, but I loved group fitness classes. Like, I'm a junkie. I will try any group fitness class you put in front of me and probably love it. And with Pilates, going kind of making the extreme kind of like coming into the space now with fitness and becoming so popular, I was like, okay, like let's see what this is about. And until I really started going to these classes and understanding the consumer, I don't think I was honestly as prepared to realize like how much solidcore impacts people's lives and how much fitness does. But coming from a consumer good marketing background to going into like marketing almost an experience, and like it's not really a product, right? It's totally different. It's not a thing. It's an experience of how you're working out mentally and physically in these classes. But it was something that has this secret sauce that I can't put my finger on it still after almost a year and a half of being here. I mean, it's the coaches, I guess, mostly, and like how they just take every class so seriously and push people to their limits that, you know, you're getting like-minded people in that room for 45, 50 minutes that you're just shutting out the noise of your everyday life and just like doing something for you that is, you're pushing yourself at the end of the day. The coach is there to, you know, offer all the adjustments, make sure you're doing it safely, upping and challenging you, but also giving you the options of like, if this is too hard, do this. But it was so interesting, I think, after really getting into the community and taking the time to build relationships with people in the company too. I was like, oh my God, I found another star in my career growth because these people are amazing. And it's been really fun to just build relationships with people all over again. Scary, but I've made some really, and it's been such an opportunity because it's such a small business too, right? At the end of the day, Reebok was this massive conglomerate, global solidcore. It started in DC. We're at 150 studios now, but it's been the trajectory of where we're going and how our business is performing. I just feel so lucky to be a part of that journey.
That is amazing. Okay, I have one last question for you about this, and then I want to open it up to the floor for anyone who has any questions for you. There's a lot I want to ask you about your role here, but we only have so much time. So one thing though, specifically, you touched on this, that really stands out to me with Solid Core is community. I think that you touched on that there, but I think that is really a huge factor in Solid Core's success is, like you said, the people that love it, love it. So now you're in this senior brand role, and now I think, honestly, I think more brands are kind of focusing on building their community because we're in a space with, we're in a world with so many options. I always say the era of abundance. And so community is a huge, it's really hard to have that. It's really hard to have strong community, and Solid Core excels in that. So how are you thinking about building that community or keeping that community, or how is that a part of your brand marketing strategy? Because I know obviously having a good product helps, but there's other reasons like why people just like love Solid Core. And I'm curious as how that kind of fits in your marketing strategy.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, Solidcore was built with community in mind. It was founded by Anne Malum, who was a female founder who is absolutely incredible in terms of just her kind of accolades. She's no longer a part of the business, but she really started it in a way that, you know, she literally bought pallets of wood, and that was to build the machines, and the machines and the boxes that it came into, she then used that wood for the decor of the studio. She was just so smart and tried to be as like stingy as possible to make and benefit off of that for herself and for this business, and she's grown it from really the ground up. And I think that storyline was just so aspirational to me in joining the company. But the community is so heartfelt because people have been with us since like day one. I mean, some of the milestones that I've heard people hit of like over 1,000 classes, I'm like, oh my God, how am I ever going to catch up to this person? But they are so diehard and through. And that's something that I never really experienced at Reebok because while we had fans of the brand, no one was like, you know, trying to buy every single thing that we put out there. Solid Core, there are people in this community that are just like, biting at their nails to figure out what the next thing is going to be. What's the next class we're going to drop? What is the next challenge we're going to do? And within our social, I think our social is quite literally the thing that really grew it and kept that community so tight. With our coaches, we don't celebrify them. Like we're not in the likes of like a Peloton where we're making one of our coaches the highlight and the face of our product. Everyone's on the same playing field. Everyone's on the same kind of trajectory, but everyone's in it together. So even when we have once a year, we all get together, every single full-time coach, all the way up to the president and CEO, we all get together and do an offsite. And it's just like career building opportunities. How do we all stay together? What are the challenges that we're facing? How do we tackle that? those things. And I think it starts with the company itself and how we build that community, because we all feel like a community that then we exuberate that in our classes. So the coaches, if a coach in Seattle has taken a class in Nashville, they know that they're the same type of person. They've challenged themselves to the solid core level. And I think that kind of gives you this weird badge of honor and like automatic connection to each other, where okay, you like to do hard things. You like to push yourself and you really care about your mental and physical well-being. And that has just built our community from the ground up. I mean, I definitely think our social channels and now kind of starting to get ourselves into influencer marketing, where they hadn't had tried that kind of before I had come on, as well as, pulling in just larger creative agencies to really push our, brand DNA and ethos into a new space that is groundbreaking and as well kind of cuts through the noise, because there's so many fitness companies out there. And just it's the day in and day out of the product being really good. And the coaches that we hire go through rigorous training. I had to go through training to be a coach the day that I stepped on to this new role, because it matters that much that I can't market the product unless I know what the client is going through, but also what the coach had to go through to get it there, which I think is really important because it puts everyone on the same playing field, like I said.
Yeah. Okay. Super, super interesting to hear that. All right. And now I'm going to open up if anybody has any questions for Marissa about her career journey or her advice or anything, you can go ahead and speak up and raise your hand, or you can go ahead and drop any questions you have in the chat.
I have a question for you, Marissa.
Sure.
Do you have any job seeking tips for new grads?
Yes. Oh my gosh. I mean, I think even in the 6 months when I left Reebok, I was like, oh my God, I haven't looked for a job in 9 years. How do I even do this anymore? LinkedIn is definitely the best way, I think, in networking, of just being able to see, what are jobs out there that are interesting to you. I always start with like, what are your passion points? What are things that make you excited in your day-to-day life? Is it beauty? Is it makeup? Is it fitness? Is it dogs because you have a dog that you love so much? And looking into companies that suit that interest for you. Once you find a role that interests you, I always, and this is like definitely maybe not always comfortable thing to do, but I always look at the connections and looking at, okay, all these people work at this company. What's the harm in cold messaging 2 or 3 of them that work there and saying, hey, I'm just graduating. This is a role that I'm looking and interested in. Do you have any thoughts and advice about what you love about the company? I'd love to pick your brain for 15 minutes. Would you be open to having like a Zoom call or a coffee chat at any point? Because making those small connections at these companies will give you the long-term leg up in just showing that you're that much more interested than the other candidate that's probably also applying for it with just a resume. And those things really stick out. I'm currently hiring, so I know that those things for me are what stick out to me, of like, this person really wants this role. And every once in a while, someone's going to take a chance on someone that maybe doesn't have the experience that it's qualified for. So it's always worth doing, even though it's sometimes uncomfortable.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Oh, I see a question in the chat from Ashley. Advice for a social media manager interested into going into brand marketing. You are so set up for success if you're starting in social media. I really think that this is an area that I didn't necessarily start in, but I wish I had, because there's no one that knows the brand better than the social media person, because they are in the DMs. They're hearing every bit of conversation around the brand, whether it's an influencer tagging them, a person complaining about something that they didn't like, or a person saying how much they really loved that piece of content. You are the pulse, and you have to be able to leverage that in the conversations to make sure that everyone in your company understands that, because you probably know better than, I always say, CX and social. They're the ones that I always go to for a sounding voice of, is this the right thing to do? Do we have any like flags or concerns by doing this or putting this marketing material out there? So I would say like you're set up for success in having that. It's just how you can communicate that in whatever that next role is for you, of why you want to get into brand, and that you have that experience already that you probably just don't even realize, in knowing kind of, what's best for you and having that experience for the next role. But know that you're definitely qualified to go into brand marketing. Absolutely.
I love that. Okay. Yazbel, if you want to ask your question, then we'll go back to the chat.
Yeah. So hi Marissa, thank you for coming today. What resources do you recommend for somebody who wants to continue learning and growing in their marketing career?
Yeah, that's such a great question, and one that I honestly am always looking for the next best thing. I listen to a lot of podcasts, especially coming into a director role. I had, as I mentioned, this imposter syndrome of like, am I a leader? Director versus senior manager felt like such a big jump to me that I didn't know if I was really going to be ready. So I always look to podcasts of ones that are highly recommended. I'm a big Brene Brown fan and Mel Robbins, of just like tapping into your emotional intelligence and how that continues to build you for the next role that you have. And then conferences. I always find that conferences pull me into, while very uncomfortable situations of like really putting yourself out there. It's something that opens a lot of doors too. So I've gone to women's leadership conferences in kind of Boston area, but there's of course them across the world. Ad Age has some really impressive ones as well. Brand innovators are doing, Zoom ones all the time, that if you can't or don't have the means to travel, you're still learning and getting that kind of experience. And Create and Cultivate was one that I really enjoyed as well. But it changes by the day. Like podcasts weren't even around when I first started my career, but now I'm so glad that they do, because you can kind of like, depending on your schedule, you're able to fit it in and learn as you go through the process. So.
Okay. We'll do another one from the chat. This one's from Sharon. How do you prevent becoming stagnant in a position? As an entry-level marketer, what can we do to continue growing beyond completing the basic job requirements?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, Sharon, and one that I feel like I can relate to. When I took that global role, I felt like a fish out of water. I'm like, oh my God, I only know the United States. I've never even been to Asia to know how to market to them. How would I know this coming into this role? And it wasn't until I kind of heard about the Pure Move bra that I was like, I'm going to raise my hand for this project. Someone else was on the project at the time, and I was like, I knew she was already overwhelmed with the project she had on her plate. And I actually went to our boss. Of course, I talked to her first because she was a colleague and a friend. And I was like, hey, I find this really interesting and something I'd be really passionate about. Would you mind if I asked our boss if I could, maybe help out, even not take it over, but just help you and learn from it? And she was like, no, please take it. And that's how I kind of got onto this passion project. So always look at maybe not what's on your plate or your to-do list or your week's calendar, but what is something that maybe a different cross-functional partner is working on that could be of interest, or that could add skills to your resume that you may not have the role or the title, but you can say that you worked on something that, for paid social, as an example, that had paid as a part of it. And you were able to just like sit in on some sessions with a paid agency and really get that experience without having to apply for a role. And those little projects that you can quantify and show that you worked on and got that experience are just going to continue to help you build and grow beyond just like your exact lane that your role is in. That would be my best advice for that. Of course.
Amazing. Okay, let's do another one from the chat. This one, we just did Sharon, so let's do Lily's. Do you have any advice for someone who's trying to break into the marketing industry without having a relevant degree or experience?
Truly, I don't know if I even look in on resumes. This is a personal, obviously. I don't look at people's degrees. I really don't. I look at the experience and I look at what makes them someone that I want to work with. I found in my career, while you are put into challenging situations, always leading with kindness and just like an open mind and listening has really put me in a lot of better positions for my next kind of gig that I wanted, because I was making connections outside of just my immediate team. I was getting coffee with someone that was on a different team that I just found aspirational or interesting in terms of their career past history. And I would always say, like, look at companies that interest you and pick someone's brain. Like I mentioned before, look and see if you can just like cold email or message someone on LinkedIn that has an interesting career path that interests you. You'd be surprised, maybe five out of the six aren't going to answer, but the one that does is going to give you some really good advice, or at least give you an opportunity to get into a new space or just learn from someone else. I know it's really hard, but always look for an entry role or something that's maybe the same level that you're at right now, that's in a marketing industry, and shoot your shot. Because listen, and those 6 months, and I know some friends now that are going through the job hunt, it's exhausting. It's a roller coaster. It's a marathon. There's no, just try not to get discouraged by not hearing back. I feel like nowadays companies ghost you left and right, and it's horrible. I mean, I don't remember that ever happening when I first came out of college, but I experienced it in that gap kind of 6 months that I had. But it's going to lead you to the right thing. You just have to stick with it, and you have to stay positive, because at the end of the day, like, people look for good people to work with. No one wants to work with someone that has a bad attitude or that's discouraged or negative. So just trying to keep as positive as possible and be a nice person. I know that sounds like such lame advice, but I've found that as much as I can network and talk to people and let them know how much I find them interesting, really helps get me the connections that I wanted to, that has led me to where I am.
That's beautiful. One thing I'll also add to that is, when you're younger, is like leaning into the fact that you want to learn. I think
Yes.
that's always a really good skill,
Huge.
of just not trying to like pretend that you don't have enough experience.
Everything.
Yeah. So it's better just like acknowledge that. Like, I know I'm fresh. I know I'm new, but I'm going to work so hard. I want to learn. I'm willing to put in the work, because employers will really value that, though, because they want, if they're going to hire you and they're going to invest all this time in you, they want to know that you also want to work hard to learn too.
Yeah. You got to respect the hustle at the end of the day. There's not everyone out there that's looking for a job has that hustle. So it automatically, in my mind, sets you apart from the crowd.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we got one more from Arene. How do you tailor your marketing strategies to different regions across the country?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and one that is very current in my day to day. So we're starting to grow into the West Coast, and we were born in DC. We are East Coast driven. I mean, New York City, you could walk 3 blocks and you'll probably see 2 solidcores. So we have that market. I feel like in our DNA, we know what works and what doesn't work. The West Coast is totally different. They can walk outside and have a beautiful workout. They don't have to worry about going into a studio to get that kind of like endorphins running. So as we look to different markets, we first look at what are the demographics of the area? What are the big companies that are there? What is the kind of like, when I say demographics, what is the age range? Are there more moms and stay-at-home moms versus, corporate day-to-day people? Because we're not necessarily in a city, we're in more of a suburb. How we market and tailor is so different based on those demographics and who we're going after. So we know our consumer and our client, but that's going to change depending on which region. So we even have solid cores in areas like North Dakota and South Dakota. How I market to them looks totally different than how I market to someone in West Hollywood, because I know what's important to someone in West Hollywood and why they're probably coming into the class may look totally different than someone in South Dakota. I think for me, client insights and client surveys is like the most important thing in how I just stay educated and how I should be looking at that market differently. And then, of course, looking at the demographics of that area. So Santana Row is an area we're growing into. It has a huge population of AAPI individuals. So for me, it's like, how do we look at these individuals and see what's important to them? What are the channels? What are the media channels that they consume most? What are areas or partners that we can partner with that resonate with that community? And really looking to kind of the grassroots things that are going to really help us stand out, because we don't want to ever feel like this conglomerate that is like a Planet Fitness, right? We want to continue to stay true to our community. So how do we literally infiltrate the community in the area that we're growing into in the most like authentic way possible? And it looks different no matter where you are. It's definitely even different in Reebok, looking at global, now being at solidcore and looking at regional. It's been easy or helpful of just having that experience of like, okay, how is this going to look different? Because it's not one blanket market plan across the nation. It has to look different to be successful.
Amazing. Yeah, super. I think that part I imagine would also be very fun because you're just always having to be creative in every space, right? Your marketing isn't the same everywhere. And even though you're not on a global scale right now, even just regionally in the US, it's crazy how different states are. So I imagine that it's fun trying to come up with different ways to market in different communities.
No, it definitely is. And we're growing in some really fun ones. Like we're going more into the San Francisco area, and San Francisco even versus LA, which is in the same state, look totally different, but it is really fun. And it's definitely opened my eyes to like areas that I maybe want to move to next, because there's so much, even in the States, that looks so different.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Okay, well, Marissa, thank you so much for answering all of these questions. Thank you so much for just being a guest on the Sky Society podcast and sharing your career history and your wisdom. This has honestly been so much fun and so informal, or so informational and so helpful. So very much appreciate you coming on the Sky Society podcast. And to everyone listening, thank you so much for coming and attending our Lucky Girl series. We have one more event tomorrow. It is at the same time as the one today, and it is with the copywriter manager at Clinique. So make sure you tune into that one as well. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. We're doing a giveaway right now. If you leave a review on the Sky Society podcast, we will email you after the event with all the details on that. So thank you so much. Thank you so much, Marissa, for coming on. It has been so much fun.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. And thank you, Natalie, so much for having me. It was really fun.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye.